Vicky Sue White and Casey Cole White were not related despite having the same last name. Vicky was 18 years and 1 day older than Casey, and they were no one's idea of a perfectly matched couple. On April 29, 2022, Vicky helped Casey, a convict serving 75 years for a crime spree in 2015, escape. Vicky was a highly respected assistant director of corrections. She'd put in 25 years with the department and was hours away from a comfortable retirement. Her colleagues loved her. Why then would someone who had everything to lose throw it all away? That's the question we're asking on Inside Job, Understanding Vicky White, a true crime podcast from Troy Public Radio. I'm Ann Kenda. A note to listeners, this story will include a description of a suicide at the end. In early May 2022, Vicky White and Casey White were camped out in a cheap hotel room in Evansville, ordering pizza in and trying not to call attention to themselves. They'd paid a homeless sex offender to reserve the room for them for 14 days. Their photos were getting splashed everywhere on TV and social media.
I knew there was a large-scale investigative story to be told about the week that the Whites had spent here in Evansville.
That's Tom Langhorne with the Evansville Courier and Press, who wrote a 7-part series about the pair's time in Evansville. He joins us now to share some of the details about law enforcement's search for one of their own.
The plan was to contain the danger. They had begun quietly tailing the Whites outside of Motel 41 in Evansville. They had wanted to trap them with an ARV, but the ARV didn't get there in time before the Whites left. They told me later that they were thinking no matter what, Casey and Vicky could not be allowed to get away.
Casey and Vicky had no known connection to Evansville other than it was just a place to hide where people would have no reason to look for them. They had been spotted, though. Law enforcement was hoping to take them quickly and safely.
There was this glare of a nationwide manhunt, ratcheting up the pressure. And if the Whites were desperate enough to trigger a wild car chase just north of Evansville, they weren't going to be able to call it off. These are not the kind of criminals that you let slip away hoping that you'll pick them up in a warrant somewhere in a few months. Because of the severity of the crimes, they just wanted to avoid a pursuit with Casey and Vicky. So the fugitive hunters, basically, they tried to snuff out any chance that a car chase might develop. And their plan was to follow the Whites from Motel 41 in unmarked vehicles and then execute a traffic stop or box them in.
In the budget motel room in Indiana, the missing inmate and guard from Alabama were spending time together, perhaps wondering where to go next. Casey later said that Vicky had all new clothes laid out for him on the bed after he got out of the shower when he no longer knew what it was like to be cared about. He referred to Vicky as his wife. At some point, they got the hint that it was time to leave the Evansville motel. A short time later, they were being followed by U.S. Marshals in unmarked vehicles.
The Marshals and task force members were going to let the Whites make the left turn. They were going to bide their time for the right moment and take them. But that plan fell apart in an instant.
Escaped inmate Casey White was driving, and he didn't know the roads. Brian Bishop, a deputy sheriff with the Vanderburgh County Sheriff's Office, had just executed a half U-turn to get behind him.
Bishop had to knife his way into line by cutting in front of a large truck, and the truck driver responded by laying on his horn. So Casey White was alerted by the racket from his perch at 41 and Lynch Road. He abruptly switched from the left lane to the right lane, and now everybody was on high alert.
The Whites were in a Cadillac they had recently purchased.
You could tell Casey knew that the gig was up. He was being followed by police. So with responding to the radio chatter, marked and unmarked vehicles that weren't already nearby appeared out of nowhere. and this chase was on.
It was a wild 2-mile chase, and then Casey, not knowing the topography, made the disastrous decision to yank the Cadillac into a grassy area at Anchor Industries in Evansville. He could see the highway, but he couldn't get to it. A task force member was then able to corner him.
He hit the White's Cadillac head on and stopped it, making eye contact with Casey White. This was a very dramatic moment.
At some point, a 911 call was made from inside the Cadillac. We don't know whether it was an auto dial or on purpose.
911.
This is the only time in this podcast where we're going to hear Vicky's voice. It's a little hard to hear, but she appears to be warning Casey that they're in danger.
Please stop. They're going to airbags going to walk and kill us.
Hello?
John. Airbags are going on. Let's get out and run. Get us back to the hotel.
Hello?
The hunt for Vicky White, once a highly respected jail official, was coming to an end, but not in the way that anyone wanted. She had been hours away from retirement on the day she went missing with inmate Casey White. The confrontation took place 11 days and hundreds of miles later.
So several officers reported hearing a single gunshot come from the upended Cadillac while they were shouting commands after they exited their vehicle. And after that, there's been a debate as to whether Vicky White intended to shoot herself in the head. But we'll never know.
An attempt was made to save Vicky White, who was still breathing at the time, but she died within a few hours at a local hospital from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Casey was pinned down and handcuffed and said something a little odd. Langhorne is quoting an officer here.
He said what Casey White said to him was, he said he didn't want us to think that he shot his wife. I'm quoting Althoff. He was saying, I did not shoot her. I did not shoot her. It was really strange. It was like, well, we didn't think you did.
Much of the confrontation was captured on body cam video and has been viewed hundreds of thousands of times on YouTube. Here's some sound from that footage. It's hard to hear, but Casey seems to be saying, "Please check on my wife," and "Please help my wife," which officers agreed to do. The sound quality is not ideal, but this is the only time we hear Casey's voice in this podcast. Casey was led away in handcuffs and Vicky was taken away in an ambulance. It was an unforgettable scene for all involved.
This young officer I interviewed, he still can't forget the sight of one of Vicky's wigs on the ground near the wrecked Cadillac. Wigs, that's disguise. And the whole world seemed to know that Vicky White was in disguise somewhere. And that's when it clicked in his mind, this is actually her.
Tom Langhorne's 7-part series for the Evansville Courier and Press about the capture is available online. The escapee's time in Evansville ended tragically with the death of Vicky White. At 56, she left behind both parents. I'm joined now by podcast manager Austin Toy, who's been working with me on this podcast. He has a few questions of his own about this case, including the question that's hard not to ask.
So lots of people have talked about Casey being a manipulator, and obviously Vicky was manipulated to some degree, but do you think that they did love each other in their own messed up kind of way, or did Casey just see Vicky as his ticket out of prison?
In my opinion, and this is just my opinion, I believe they did love each other. And as you said, it was perhaps a messed up way. And I think it was very unwise, which love sometimes is, but I think in my heart, I do believe that they did love each other.
So I know Vicky's ex-husband died a few months before the escape, and a lot of people have have speculated whether that had anything to do with it. And I'm just curious what your thoughts on that are.
I do believe that the death of Vicky's ex-husband had a lot to do with this, especially when you look at the timing. He died in January, and by April, Vicky was committing this escape with Casey White. And one thing I've learned about grief is that grief is just grief. There's no such thing as having the right to grieve and I think sometimes people minimize grief and they say, well, it was her ex-husband. She shouldn't care as much as she did. But obviously she did care, and he died from Parkinson's disease after a very long and painful battle, and she was sometimes helping his caregivers get him in and out of a car, and I think it was painful for her to see her ex-husband going through that experience. And I think it changed something in her heart. That's the impression I get.
So, Anne, you've obviously been working on this podcast, but you also covered the story of this prison escape for NPR. And so I just wanted to ask, what is it about this story that you found so interesting?
I think it was just the people involved. Vicky was well-liked and well-respected until she took this very dramatic turn in life, and we started to learn about Casey White and his background. I think it was the people that really caught my attention for this very compelling story. Today, Casey and Vicky still have fans. There's a waiting list for room 150 at the Budget Motel in Evansville. People want to stay in the exact room where the duo spent their last week of freedom. Next time on Inside Job, Understanding Vicky White, Lieutenant Gary Cornelius helps us understand how these risky relationships that form behind bars can be prevented, so there isn't another story like Vicky White's.
If you have good people in your life, and there's a lot of positive things in your life, like relationships and friends and so forth, that can serve to protect you from manipulation. But if your personal life is sad or in disarray, or you're frustrated, and the inmate finds out about these things, they can move right in.
That's next time on Inside Job, Understanding Vicky White, a true crime podcast from Troy Public Radio. Austin Toy is our producer. Kyle Gassett edits the podcast. Inside Job is dedicated in loving memory to true crime buff Mandy Rose Morrow. Until next time, when we go inside again, I'm your host, Ann Kenda.